Looking at the Queen Anne, that's what she looks like. Quite a structure, quite an impressive structure. Street on the side of the Queen Mary, parking is 2 hours, and no parking from 10 to noon. And they will tell you that there's parking available across the street from them. Here it is over here. Here's this lot. And that's where you, if you are a patron of the hotel, that's where you get to park at, is across the street there, and they'll give you something to put on the dash, because they do a pass-through regularly to make certain that there's no cars parking there that are unauthorized. They would get towed. We arrived here at the Queen Anne just a few weeks before Christmas, so they already had their Christmas decorations set out over the entire lobby area. According to the Queen Anne legend, this very elaborate hotel was designed, commissioned, and paid for by a rich guy from Nevada, James G. Fair, who at one time had been a U.S. Senator for the state of Nevada. Even though Fair was married, he liked his booze and he liked his ladies. Presumably, none of them his wife, because he had been divorced before he ever got to San Francisco. Supposedly, he had more than one mistress, and this place was built for his favorite mistress, a young lady by the name of Mary Lake, who was a school teacher in San Francisco at that time. Legend has it that Mary Lake opened up this place as the Mary Lake School for Girls. Fair had ulterior motives. The idea was that his 2 daughters could be sent here to this school and stay here until they reached maturehood, thus rendering him free to cavort about as he saw fit. Legend, which historians have only been able to prove part of. Trippy place, man. Complete with a chandelier which swings back and forth every time it goes up and down, and doors that take forever, and I mean forever, to open. Whoa. Well, that's a slow door. It is historically verifiable that James G. Fair's money did in fact build this structure, and that it was open as a boarding school for girls. What's questionable is the Mary Lake connection, and the school didn't last that long. Construction on this project began in 1889, and it was completed in 1890. The school was to be short-lived. Within 6 or 7 years it shut down, and the records show that in 1899 it was sold to the Cosmos Gentlemen's Club, which is not like a gentleman's club like we have today with pole dancing. It was basically a place for rich bankers to hang out. The Cosmos Club would be in here about 12 years. After that, it became one of the Episcopal Diocese's Girls-Friendly Society Lodge, and they had many all around the world, one even in the Philippines. And here we are, the Mary Lake Suite, room 410. This is the room that the hotel says was Mary Lake's office when she was here with the boarding school, and is the one that supposedly has the activity in. So begs the question, was there ever even such a person as a Miss Mary Lake? So here we are in the Mary Lake room. Jan's already found the bed to be comfortable while she plays with her iPhone. I figured out how we're going to put the equipment up here to see how many wall plugs we've got going for power. Did come with a refrigerator and a coffee maker and a bidet next to the toilet. Looks to be a pretty decent room. Find out if old Mary Lake is here.
George told you that he was going to leave his wife and be with you. That was just a fairy tale, wasn't it? This is ridiculous. You said you had keys to their house.
Usually when I start digging into the records of these old hotels that we do investigations on, it doesn't take me very long to disprove the legends. But I have to give the Queen Anne credit, because in this case, The legend turned out to be fact, at least most of it. Some of it is supposition and assumed, but the parts that I found prove that the story is accurate. And to get a grasp as to why this hotel was built and why the finishing school didn't survive, we have to go into the history a little bit. James G. Fair was a poor Irish immigrant. Came to the United States with his father in 1843, grew up on a farm in Illinois, and came to California in the gold rush of 1850. His attention soon shifted to Virginia City, Nevada. He formed a partnership with 3 other Irishmen. John William Mackey, who owned the Mackey House in Virginia City, where we've also done an investigation. Seems like wherever these guys go, something gets haunted. And a couple of guys who were the investment arm, James C. Flood and William O'Brien. They called their business firm the Bonanza Firm, later on using their resources to discover an even richer mine than the Comstock was, which they named the Big Bonanza, and for which the old TV western Bonanza took its name from. Goes without saying that Fair became one of the richest men in the world, probably the richest man in the world at that period. By now, he's well married to a woman named Teresa Rooney, and they have 4 kids. 2 sons, James Jr., for which no pic exists, and Charles, along with 2 daughters younger than the sons. The first, Teresa, called Tessie, and the second, Virginia, who had the nickname Birdie because of a small waist. Fair ran for Senate in 1881, got elected, and went to Washington. He quickly became an alcoholic, if he wasn't one already, and found the D.C. ladies to be quite fair compared to his wife. 2 years into his Senate term, she divorces him, gets the mansion and $5 million. She also takes custody of the 2 girls, while he gets custody of the 2 boys. He also gets a new nickname, Slippery Jim. Oldest son, James Fair Jr., follows footsteps of father, becomes an alcoholic, does rehab a couple of times, and a few months after his mother is to die in 1891, he commits suicide in the family home in San Francisco, although the papers managed to hush it up pretty well. Second son Charles marries early to a known San Francisco prostitute against the wishes of both parents. And now that leaves the 2 girls. What, oh what, could be done with 2 young ladies to afford them a quality education and to get them away from an estranged spouse? In 1889, Fair's money started construction of this structure. Like antiques in all of these hallways here. Another stairway there? Yeah, there is, huh? This is the 2nd floor. Going on down to get some sherry and cookies that they serve every day from 4 to 6.
You realize that if you don't come, but you always win surprise, right?
In Jeff Dwyer's book, Ghost Hunter's Guide to the San Francisco Bay Area, Pelican Press, 2011, Dwyer made a stab through historical records at attempting to prove that Mary Lake existed and that she was connected to this structure. He's one of the few investigators that has ever done this, other than just the hotel themselves. He points out that the 1880 census for San Francisco lists only 2 Mary Lakes, one of them married, one of them unmarried. The unmarried one, listed as Mary O. Lake, he surmised had to be the correct one. He also says that, according to the census, she was listed as having a daughter, and that's inaccurate. She's actually listed as being the daughter in that census. But that's about as far as Dwyer takes us, except to say that she's also listed in some of the San Francisco directories, which happens to be the most important part. Here's a hint. Whenever you're trying to research somebody, don't just go after the person, but go after the family members, because genealogically speaking, they'll always come back into contact with each other one way or another. Now, I'm not trying to pick on Dwyer here. I like his book. It could be also that the records just weren't available during that time period as they are today. The 1880 U.S. Census, taken in San Francisco, California, that he refers to, shows the entire inhabitants of the Lake family. Father Delos, whose occupation is listed as a lawyer, Mother Myra, and then there's Mary, followed by sisters Helen and Annie, and brother Frederick. Tracing back, we find the Lake family in the 1850 census in New York. Mary O., the O stands for Ostrom, was born July 15, 1849 in Little Falls, Herkimer County, New York. There was Father Delos, an attorney even at that time, his wife Helen, and his wife's sister Marietta. Charles, Mary's brother, died within a year. The other children have not been yet born. In the 1860 census, we find the family has now relocated to San Francisco. Mary O. is now 11 years old. Father Delos does not show up on this page, but he does show up at a different address, probably the census taken at his law firm. Wise to relocate the family, because if he'd have stuck around in New York, he would have wound up in the Union Army. In this census collection, Mary O.'s mother Helen is not listed. Helen's sister Myra is misspelled Eliza and is shown as the head of the family. This was a mystery, but what actually happened was that Mary's mother Helen Clark died when Mary was 3 years old. Father Delos then remarried his wife's sister. This left two different first names for the mother, while it left the same maiden last name. This made Mary's stepmother also her aunt, and her half-brothers and sisters born through Myra, also her cousins. Sounds like the beginning of one of those Ray Stevens songs. In the 1870 census, we find Mary's name misspelled as Minnie. That's what happened when you let people do the census that can't hear properly. And also listed with the family is somebody whose occupation is listed as a coachman, early name for chauffeur, and also a domestic helper. Yes, Lawyer Delos is doing well at this period of time. If Mary was ever to have earned that title as a mistress, she would have had to have done it during this census period. Farrer began investing in California real estate in 1869, but is definitely in San Francisco by 1876 when Mary was about 27. But if you recall, in 1880, he's back in Nevada, preparing to run for the U.S. Senate seat in 1881, which he does win and go to Washington, D.C. 2 years into his term, his wife divorces him, so by the time he gets back to San Francisco, he's no longer a married man, he's a single guy. If she met him after that time period, she wouldn't be a mistress, she'd just be a girlfriend that didn't get a ring on her finger. Now, she could have met him in the 1870s, but considering that she's still living under a common roof with her family, that her daddy's an affluent attorney, and that he has to have a coachman, and she would have to have a coachman to drive her wherever she went, that idea seems a little dubious. And now, back to the 1880 census, where we see multiple servants listed. This catch of high society would only last for a couple of years, though. In 1882, Daddy Delos dies. The obituary in San Francisco listed him as Judge Delos, and that explains why he had the coachman. Some extended family member has devoted some time to keeping the Find a Grave website up to date. His death would essentially fracture the close-knit family. 7 years down the road, in the 1887 directory, we find Mary has now moved out. She would now be about 38. She is now going by her preferred name of Miss Mary Lake, and is working for the Zeitska Institute. The Zeitska Institute, established by Madame Bertha Zeitska, is one of San Francisco's most prestigious girls' schools in history. You'll find it referenced in a lot of websites. Note the address at 922 Post Street, where she moved her school to about 1878 while Mary was still living at home. According to Google, that's the approximate location of this structure. After the 1906 earthquake, these structures were renumbered as a lot of them couldn't be rebuilt, so it's somewhere in this area. Madame Zeitska did have on-the-premise live-in instructors, but at this point Mary does not list her address as being at this address. Somewhere during this time period is the most logical time period when James G. Farrer would have met Miss Mary Lake, possibly when he was researching the Zeitska Institute to see about placing his daughters there, and instead found her and decided to build his own. And simple logic would also dictate that it was more than just business that developed between them. But again, single man, single woman, not a mistress. However, by 1889, she does list this as her address. That was the year that James G. Farrer requisitioned the Queen Anne to be built. We know he did because years later, when the Cosmos Club ended up with the property, the San Francisco Call newspaper said it was part of the Farrer estate. 1 year later, she lists her address as living at where the Queen Anne now stands. That address has also been changed. Where it is now 1590 Sutter, it used to be 1534 Sutter. These last two directories were too faded to reproduce. In fact, whoever transcribed them also listed the address wrong. They've got it as 1034 Sutter, a corner of Octavia, when it was actually 1534. James G. Farrer ran newspaper ads showing this particular lithograph all up and down the Pacific coast from California to Seattle, letting the public know of his new finishing school for girls, and his new principal and matron, Miss Mary Lake. That lithograph was an artist's rendition of this pre-1906 earthquake photo. Note the stairs leading up with the access on the second floor to provide security for the girls, and the dome, both of which are no longer there and were probably destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. It was a fabulous structure, outside and inside. In this particular photo, it does appear as though the Queen Anne architecture included both the front and back end of what is now the structure. It's like they have a secondary staircase, goes down here, and a major staircase. That's kind of unusual. 410, the hallway continues on down here to other rooms. Splits off. Oh, it's a big place. Go all the way back down here. See what's down here. Kind of dark back here. Some doors back here. Wow, that'd be a real quiet part of the hotel. Oh, that's where this place was built. Emergency exit. Oh, here's the other stair. Oh, it goes up to a wall. It just ends right there. They walled it off. I wonder what was up there. That's interesting. Well, that's from the 3rd floor going up to wherever that went. I suppose it must have been an attic at one time. They sealed it up. Fascinating. Wonder how much stuff is left up there. I don't know. Looks like maybe it goes to the roof up there. Anyway. This stair was much more narrower than the other stairs. Easy to take a header coming down this one. Now we're on the 3rd floor. On the 3rd floor, the hotel has placed a Senator Fair suite pretty much just below the Mary Lake suite above. I guess so he could tap on the ceiling for her with his cane. Same type of hallway. Come on down here, we've got 3 rooms down here. May have been an add-on. So they got 48 rooms here. Going down to the 2nd floor. These doors are in wood instead of in white, like the upper doors. Wood motif on the 2nd floor. Now they turn white. Big mirror at the end. Wow, that's amazing. Now this one says employees only. If you go down to the 1st floor there, must be the kitchen down there. And again it goes down to the end. This is the original parquet on the floor. What a place. I'd have to say that the wood doors would reflect where the bishop stayed in. And then this last stairway goes on down there to the ground floor. To the left is where we have the breakfast served in the morning. The same year, 1899, that James G. Fair starts construction of what is to become the Queen Anne for his daughters, if indeed that's why he did it at all. Oldest daughter, Teresa, outwits him. She up and marries a rich guy by the name of Herman Ehrlichs, who is about twice her age. The Ehrlich family owns a German shipping line, so she's married into quite a bit of money. They throw one of the most lavish weddings that San Francisco has ever seen. Daddy Fair is not invited, although he does give him $1 million for a wedding gift. And now that leaves Bertie, who at the time the Queen Anne was completed in 1890 would have been 15 years old. But remember, she's still under guardianship of her mother, who has custody of her. Did she ever spend a single night in Mary Lake's boarding school as was intended? Well, certainly not while Mom had custody. 1 year later, her mother dies, and the newspapers report that Miss Bertie Fair had always lived with her. Both daughters each get $1.5 million in the will, plus a monthly stipend. Bertie is now a very rich and desirable 16-year-old girl who can do what she wants to. Of course, she could have chosen to attend the Miss Mary Lake School, but no, instead she goes to live with her sister and brother-in-law in New York. The newspapers of the era are full of reports of Bertie getting engaged to this guy or that guy. In this particular article, the newspapers reported that Herman Ehrlichs, Teresa's husband, notified James G. Fair that, no, it's not a fact that Bertie's getting married, she's actually in a Catholic school. Miss Mary Lake gets her newspaper limelight also. During the years the school was open, there's articles about its opening, about its programs, commencement exercises, graduation exercises. Some articles give lists of all of the graduating students, and she had a lot of students, none of which was Bertie Fair. Most of the graduation exercises were administered by church officiants. On December 28, 1894, James G. Fair follows his ex-wife in death from complications due to diabetes and alcoholism. He leaves an estimated $40 million to be divided amongst his 3 remaining children. Mary Lake School is now owned by the 2 daughters, and she is unprotected from the financial vultures. By 1897, she has given her walking papers, and the school is earmarked for sale. Whether this was a slap at her or was just financial will never be known. On January 20th, 1897, the Cosmos Club served official notice of their purchase. According to the newspaper article, the Mary Lake School had vacated in June of 1896, which is just 1.5 years after James G. Fair died. That means that Fair's daughters gave enough time for the last class of 1895 to graduate, and then Miss Mary Lake was out on her ears, so to speak. And who were these Cosmos people? Well, their 1899 membership roster, the year that they took over the Mary Lake School, shows many of James G. Fair's friends in there. Also listed is James L. Flood, the son of James C. Flood, who was the investor from the Virginia City days, and probably a young man that Tessie and Virginia played with when they were kids. Yeah, they knew exactly who to sell it to. The 1897 city directory shows that Mary Lake has now moved to an address on Pacific Avenue, as does the 1898 directory and the 1899 directory. After that, she just falls off the face of the earth as far as San Francisco is concerned. And now that she's gone, the Fair children could live happily ever after? Well, hardly. As was reported, oldest son James Fair Jr. committed suicide. Younger son Charles follows in the footsteps of his father and his older brother and becomes an alcoholic. He ends up killing him and his wife in a car accident in Paris in 1902, which left his sisters to squabble with the dead wife's family over who should get Charles part of the inheritance. Of course, in the end, they would win out. In 1899, the same year that the Cosmo Club takes over what is now known as the Queen Anne Hotel, Bertie, now 24 years old, marries William K. Vanderbilt and becomes probably the richest woman in the entire world. She later divorces, getting most of his money, and dies in 1935 following a nervous breakdown over the death of her only son. Teresa is a widow within 6 years of her marriage, and of course she inherits most of his money. She tries to spin her way to happiness, reportedly changing evening gowns up to 6 times a day and never wearing the same gown twice. After her husband's death, she does return to San Francisco to build the Fairmont Hotel, a tribute to her dead father. She hated him when he was alive, but now that he's dead and she's got his money, yeah, he's kind of cool. According to her servants, she would spend the last years of her life as an old woman, wandering around an empty mansion, holding conversations with imaginary guests. A truly rich and truly dysfunctional American family. Go figure. So after 1899, what happens to poor old Mary Lake, which historians researching the Queen Anne have never been able to just quite pin down? Well, an 1899 passport applied for in person in New Jersey attests to the fact that she went to New Jersey to live with her half-sister Annie. Remember what I said about tracking the relatives when you lose track of the subject itself. The application shows her birthplace as Little Falls, New York, and her birth date as July 15, 1849. And it is signed as Mary Lake, Miss, her signature moniker. The passport says it is good for 2 years to travel abroad, probably back to Ireland, but I could find no proof that she ever went. In 1904, she dies, and the San Francisco newspapers carry the story. She died at Mount Clair, New Jersey. The cause of death is not disclosed. Her and half-sister Annie are buried side by side. Curiously, there is a third stone broken off, of which we don't know who it is. Some extended family member has provided a nice epitaph for the website explaining the details of her life. After finding out this information, I had pretty well decided that Mary Lake could not be the source of any activity at the Queen Anne. And then Jan pointed out to me something that I had missed. Notice the tombstone? She died on her 55th birthday. Of course, that can happen. The static odds of it are roughly 1 in 365. But during the course of these types of investigations, we normally find that when someone dies on an event that's special to them, special to another person involved in the story, or to an event in the story, it's usually because there was a little nudging. It's a red flag for suicide. Of course, just like the San Francisco newspaper, none of them are going to tell us whether it was or not. Whoever wrote that epitaph does imply there was some emotional issues and maybe has some information they're not willing to share. If she did take her own life, and as she lay dying, reflected upon the one time and space when she was happy, could that thought be enough to catapult somebody's mind back to that location? Maybe yes, maybe no. We just don't know. We don't know what the mind is capable of doing in the last throes of death. Now we can do nothing but rely upon the findings of the equipment. At little past 3 in the morning on that first night's stay, the cell sensor unit that was on the dresser beeped 3 or 4 times. It was enough to wake me up. We termed that a flyby, and it basically indicates that there's activity in the room. Something came in to scope us out and just went on by. And that was it for the first night. The second morning, while we were still laying in bed deciding whether to get up or not, I began to read to Jan some of the legends that were available on different websites about the hotel. Curiously, at exactly the point where I started relaying to her the legend about Miss Mary Lake being James Fair's mistress, the cell sensor that was sitting on the table next to the chair and out of our sight started going off.
That Senator James G. Fair, that's the room underneath this, had a favorite mistress, Mary Lake. She became the head mistress in charge of teaching 100 well-to-do girls the behavior norms of women from upper class society, including etiquette, social skills, and polite standards at the time. She truly enjoyed teaching and taking care of people.
Also curious is that we didn't notice because there was no sound.
Seriously, however, the school closed in 1896, probably because of financial difficulties.
Now, the fact that there was no sound could indicate a low battery, because once the batteries start running down, the first thing to lose power is the chirper. But usually when the battery gets that low, the unit will cease to operate altogether. This cell sensor unit would continue to activate for about 10 minutes, and then as soon as I changed the conversation to a different topic, it would abruptly shut off, almost like the old bird herself was sitting right there in that chair listening to us. That day, after we left the room to go to the Alcatraz tour, the REM pod unit that was sitting on the dresser activated sporadically throughout the day. The REM pod creates its own EMF field around itself, and that field must be broken by a secondary field in order to set it off. Whatever it was that broke the field was not strong enough to activate the REM pod past 1 or 2 lights showing. That's pretty weak. But it would register 1 or 2 lights every half hour or so the entire time that we were out of the room. This is the same spot where the cell sensor went off on the first night and woke me up. What I took note of is right on the other side of this wall where these units sit, there is a secondary door that has been sealed up. The activity appeared to come through that door into the room. So the way we're looking at right here is the Mary Lake suite is in room 410 and it extends this direction, and then here there's a fake door which has been sealed over, which is now part of the wall on the inside, which means that originally these were two different rooms and separated right there in the middle where the picture is. Now it could be that one room was Mary's business place, at her desk and whatever, and the other room was her dressing and sleeping area. Of course, at the time they were here, there was no indoor plumbing, there was no bathrooms. By the appearance of the existing hardware hinges on these doors, it appears as though they've been here for a long, long time, which means that the room walls were taken out in order to turn two rooms into one. It wasn't the other way around where a fake door just happened to be installed for looks. Pretty weak. Not much captured after 3 days of constant surveillance. There is some activity here, the instruments prove that, but it's our guess that it's not centered in room 410. More likely it's passing through where that door's been sealed up and going in and out of the room. As is the case with many of these old hotels, the rooms get renumbered over the years. Sometimes walls get taken out, walls get added, different rooms get put together into one room. We don't really even know if this was the original room that Mary Lake was in. Usually they pick a room to put the plaque on that generates the most money for the rental. We're not planning on coming back here, but if we did, we'd choose another room. And if you go in our stead, be sure to watch out for someone that matches the description of Mary Lake's 1899 New Jersey passport. 5'2", high forehead with gray and brown hair, oval face with a large chin and a full mouth. Almost sounds like a reason why someone didn't get married in life. We gave the Queen Anne an activity level rating of low and sporadic.
Take